From FLX1.com, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. Our program today begins at City Hall in Geneva. Last fall, City Manager Matt Horn announced that he would be leaving his post in January 2018. It left officials with about 2 months or about a month and a half to determine their course of action. Despite Horn's favorable reviews, though, over his tenure, many saw this as an opportunity to find a city manager that better represents the community. It's been a confusing process, though, and the community has a lot of questions, like why wasn't the city manager search committee roster, which was just released a couple weeks ago, released sooner? And why wasn't that made public sooner? And why are certain groups of individuals seeming to be missing from that assortment of individuals? We have, in my opinion, one of the only people capable of speaking to this issue well enough here in studio, Geneva Believer founder Jim Meaney. He was here a couple months ago. Jim, obviously really excited to have you back again to talk about this because, oh my God, there's just so many different things going on, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back. Since the last time I was here, there's a lot of other stories that I've covered, but
the city is things are still happening in the city despite this one massive issue.
Right. But this is so important. As a lot of people realize, the city manager job at this time and over Matt Horn's tenure, it's very influential. It doesn't necessarily need to be as influential if city councilors would take more of the initiative to learn about things and to make decisions and to ask questions. They tend to rely on the city manager to make the decisions for them. That's been on everyone's mind. I've covered some other stories, but coming in today, I wanted to see if we could just focus in on the whole city manager search and the timeline and go through it.
Right, and it's been it hasn't been that long a process so far. That seems to be the remarkable thing, at least from my viewpoint outside of the city, is that all of this you're talking about a course of maybe 4 months, right? Is that, are we at about like the 4-month-ish mark?
Yep.
For those who might not live in the city or might not be up to speed, talk to us about what sort of got us to the beginning stages of where we were when, obviously, former city manager Matt Horn said, I'm going to be taking another opportunity. Sure.
I do want to go back to the context of how a lot of people in the city view city council and how they viewed city council in December. Over the year and a half prior to Matt Horn announcing his resignation, there were a lot of things that happened with city council that violated the trust of a lot of people in the city, and there were a lot of questions about transparency. There was the lakefront parcel sale, which almost took place in the fall of 2016, when City Council had some meetings with a developer to purchase, I think it was 7 acres down by the lakefront, or maybe less than that, near the lakefront, near the state
triangular-shaped piece of property that was on smack dab the front page of the Finger Lakes Times for a couple Sundays. And
a lot of people didn't know that it was happening. The way that they presented it to the public was confusing. They ended up, City Council ended up, the Ethics Committee in the city did find that City Council had dropped the ball in terms of informing people on that sale happening. Of course, there was the Geneva Foundry issue related to transparency. I mean, that's a transparency issue going back decades. In 2000, what I covered on the blog was the 2017 council retreat, which was open to the public. And one of the counselors, Mark Gramling, broadcast some of the sessions that go on. And it's city council retreats. When city council gets together, they have sessions with different departments of the city who describe to them the state of the city, what's going on, what they can expect in the future. And there was a session with the city attorney who spoke to city council and essentially told them to always err on the side of caution when it comes to speaking with the media, and told them in no uncertain terms that they're better off if they don't speak to the media, if they don't talk about issues with the media. He used the ethics the ethics guidelines that the city has, the code of ethics, to justify that. but that's not. I don't believe that was really the spirit of it. The idea was councilors shouldn't go out and talk about things going on in the city, and let anyone think that they're speaking on behalf of the city or on behalf of council.
Right.
Instead, the city attorney essentially told them, if you're in doubt, don't talk to the media, don't answer the questions. And I haven't seen a lot of councilors doing a lot of interviews here or elsewhere since that time. They used to do a lot of guest columns in the paper. I don't see a lot of that happening. And then there was the Marsh Creek thing that happened in about a year ago, or actually I think it was early summer, where there was 5,000 gallons of raw sewage spilled into a creek that goes through Ward 6, through neighborhoods, through a city park. And the city didn't tell anyone about that. Finger Lakes 1 was on top of that story from the DEC notifications and wrote about it first, and then I picked up on that. So back in December when Matt Horn left, all of those things, just in that past year and a half, there was a feeling that City Council is doing things behind our back, and they need to be more open and transparent with what they do. So that led to a lot of people asking questions. Well, how's this search going to go? Well, let's wait and see. Let's see what the city has planned. And then January came. The announcement was made in December. Matt Horn's last day was in January. In January, they posted the job on websites around the country because it was a nationwide search. They announced who would be taken over as the city manager trio, the people in City Hall who would be taking over the city manager duties. And I think there was also an event honoring Matt Horn at Club 86. And then there was really not much said, not much coming from City Hall. Mm-hmm. So I think people were still waiting to hear and to see what was going to happen. February rolled around and the city put out a survey. Mm-hmm. The survey was on the city website. There were also paper surveys available at City Hall. None of them were in Spanish. They were only in English. It was a series of questions to get input from the community on what they would like to see in their next city manager. At the time when I saw the survey, I said, this is a good idea. It's at least they're doing something.
Right.
It was like a 20-day deadline, though, for people to fill out the survey and complete it.
Which is tough. That's a quick turnaround.
Yeah. I would have liked to have seen at the time maybe a little more outreach. Maybe counselors maybe they ask people, maybe they have some community meetings. Mm-hmm. Anything besides just a survey. There's a lot of things that can be said about surveys, the questions that are asked, how much information are you getting? Do you know that you're getting a wide demographic of the city, or are there just certain types of people that respond to these surveys? So the survey came and went, and still nobody really knew what was going on. They knew that the job was posted, and they knew that they did this survey, and the city never circled back to tell anyone what happened with the survey, what the results were, or anything like that. So a lot of us were still waiting to hear what would happen next.
I think I've counted something like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, something like 3 or 4 red flags already that seem to have popped up in this process, which, if nothing else, was communicated very poorly. Because I think the assumption would be, for those who might be listening, to just think that this is someone saying, well, bad process, bad this, bad that. This could literally be a communication error over a long, long, long period of time. That seems to sort of be the best case scenario.
Sure.
Now, obviously, can't get inside anybody's head. You don't know. But it's just, I think it's really interesting because a lot of this, when you look at any government entity, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be that communication is the place where they struggle most, especially in the more rural, less densely populated cities, towns, villages, etc. Continue on.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I absolutely I agree. And as I mentioned, it was just one piece of information coming out each month for the first 2 months, which was concerning. And then March 4th, there was a guest column in the Finger Lakes Times from Chris Lavin, who's the director of the Geneva Boys and Girls Club, where he said, "Hey, I got a letter in the mail inviting me to be on the city manager search committee, and here's what I think will happen, and here's why I'm very excited to be part of this search committee," which took everyone who hadn't gotten one of those letters, I assume, by surprise. It was a very weird and clumsy way for that news to get out, that the city was actually starting to do this process of putting together a committee. They want to put together a committee that represents the diverse community that we have, and that committee would help city council. They would make recommendations to city council on who the city manager would, who the eventual city manager would be.
How much of so taking that guest appearance in the Finger Lakes Times and setting it aside, how much of a concern does the search committee roster? How much of a concern is that roster as it sits right now?
Well, for me, the concern, it isn't necessarily about individual people. I know some of the people on the committee. Right. I know people who know people on the committee.
Frankly, I thought, and as an outsider, I'm going through the list and I'm saying, most of these individuals are well-known people. They are people who people know.
Sure.
I sort of thought to myself, is that one of the issues? I mean, shouldn't you sort of want to seed this roster with individuals who might not be as out front or associated with these large organizations that do play a big role in the community, but also aren't the entire community?
Sure. There's people who do the work, who are doing work within the communities, within the community, within the different communities within the community,
right,
who could have gotten the opportunity. They just weren't asked. So for them to say that this represents the diversity in our community is very concerning, because that I don't know if they believe it or not. I don't know if, and a lot of the names are names that you see on other committees over the years.
Right.
The average age, the other thing that's concerning to me is that the average age of the committee member is 58. Nothing against people who are 58, but we have a lot of really intelligent, involved, engaged, bright, younger people in the city. It doesn't necessarily mean high school people, but if you look at downtown and all the downtown business owners, many of them are under 40.
I was going to say, that was 40. Something you reported on, correct? Like, that was something that I remember reading in one of your stories, I believe, where essentially you're laying out the argument that these people have to be part of the discussion. They have to be part of the search committee. They have to be part of this whole process.
Sure, they're part. I mean, a lot of people give the credit to the city manager for the revitalization of downtown, and he deserves some credit. But the people who put their life savings and their their families' well-being and everything on the line to work 12 hours a day, 6-7 days a week to start a little business in downtown, those people deserve to be part of the process as well. I've heard comments from the community that younger people may not be essentially not as reliable serving on these committees, because they have families or they have other things going on, which is, obviously I think that's beyond unfair. If you've had an experience in the past where one of the younger people didn't show up to your committee, that doesn't mean that that's how things go forever. And Geneva is changing, and a lot of the people who are really pushing that change are not on this,
right,
not even mentioned on this committee.
So you essentially laid out the circumstances perfectly, but the question that really still has to be answered is, how were these individuals selected?
Right. Yeah.
How?
What we've been told is that each city councilor came up with a list of people that they felt would be good for this committee. City council then met in executive session, and each councilor nominated who they thought should be on the committee, and they voted and narrowed it down and came up with their list of people, which I understand that the decision and the responsibility lies with city council. City council are going to be the ones who make the final approval. They're the ones who hire the city manager. But, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, they could have put a lot more time and effort into it. I understand the city councilors don't get paid much, but you want to reach out to people. Why don't you put something, if you're on social media, put that out there. If you're not on social media, get on social media, because it's 2018. You're a city official. You're a representative. Get out there. Get active. Think of other people. The names that are on this list, there were really, I wasn't really surprised by them. I was surprised at some of how it seemed to be weighted towards developers and banks and more moneyed interests than people. But I mean, the list, that's essentially how city council selected the committee, which really didn't involve the community.
But city council won't be married to that decision. Like, they won't be forced to deal with whatever, accept whatever the recommendation is of the search committee. So should there be a concern among the city councilors or city officials, for that matter, that a search committee, if the wrong people were on that committee, could make a decision that could potentially cause some sort of grief? It just seems like it would be a much safer option, politically and otherwise, to just make the group as diverse as possible and just cover all of your bases, so that you aren't fighting this PR battle, which it sort of seems like Geneva is now battling on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. Is that your sense, or is that like? Because it doesn't jive in my mind that like city council should be that worried about what the search committee comes up with, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are, one, going to have to own it, and two, they aren't married to that final choice that they make, right?
Right. Well, and that's funny that you bring that up, because I was going to say that a couple of people have reached out to counselors. I don't have the emails or whatever, but what the response that people are getting when they're expressing to council their concern about the selection of the committee is counselors are telling them, well, we're the ones who make the decision anyway. So if there are things that are important to you, come to us, come to city council, tell us what kind of values you have and what kind of city manager you think you want, and lean on us a little bit and let us know, which in a way just basically says that the committee is meaningless. So why are you going through with the whole process of putting together this committee?
A time-consuming process.
A time-consuming process, and a process that's raising a lot of eyebrows and getting a lot of people annoyed and upset and hurting that trust, the little trust that they have left. And if your response is, well, the committee doesn't mean that much anyway, I believe that the recommendations of the committee certainly have to weigh into their decisions. They're not just going to take all the names and start from scratch, and nobody's going to mention what the committee did. Whatever decisions the committee comes up with are going to be very important.
Okay, so one of the big questions that I've been getting, and that I actually had in the beginning of this entire process, obviously I co-host a podcast with Jackie Augustine, and we have talked about this issue multiple times. What does nationwide search mean? Your take on it, because it's such a broad term, and I feel like it's a very easy phrase to fall back on. If you are a municipal entity trying to, make it seem as though the process is clean and there's nothing shady happening and everything is just all of our ducks are in a row, we're conducting a nationwide search, right?
Yeah, to me, what that means is that we have posted the job on websites that can be read across the nation. I don't know what else it means as far as a nationwide search.
Does that mean there's outreach to other cities of comparable size and diversity measures to the city of Geneva? Because that was one of the things that crossed my mind. I thought maybe they're going, but it seems as though the process is moving so fast, and that was going to be another one of my questions. This is not a long time. I believe the last thing I saw in the Finger Lakes Times is related to when a decision might be made would be end of summer or at some point during the summer, a decision to name a city manager less than 6 months after one who held that position for 10 years or thereabouts. Is that enough time? Is that appropriate?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, it took them a year and a half, almost 2 years to put the comprehensive plan together. And the comprehensive plan is a document that, is our city's Bible, or our city's roadmap for what the city is going to do for the next 15 years. The city manager choice is just as important. No, I think it certainly isn't enough time. And again, there's another question: what is a nationwide search? Nobody's telling us. And again, it just keeps coming back to, we don't know what exactly they're doing. And it's and the timeline. I mean, the committee just met for the first time last week. And by the way, one other thing that I noticed on the city's website is when they posted the full roster. They ended up posting the full roster on April 10th. I had only had the 17 names. They hadn't decided on the last 3 names. And on April 10th, they posted the roster of the city manager search committee, which was the first time they referred to it as the city manager search community committee. They've shoehorned the word community in there just to maybe to assuage people's concerns and just to let them know that they are thinking about the community. But that city manager search committee, community committee, whatever it is, they're looking at the applications right now. February 2nd, they're going to turn in their votes to City Council, which is on the rubric of yes, maybe, no. And then there are going to be a first round of phone interviews where the committee will be there with City Council and with city employees. And then the job of the committee is done. And then it's up to City Council for probably going to be June, July, August, maybe over the summer, to conduct more interviews, do some in-person interviews. So it's moving quickly, and there seems to be this determination on the city not to slow it down, not to tap the brakes, not to stop and say, maybe we could bring more people in, maybe we could be a little more clear with the public on how this is being done. And I don't know what the.
So to sort of recap what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes or so, confidence level, scale of 1 to 10. What would you gauge that number to be within the community as a whole? I'm sure there are some people who feel confident in this process, but I would imagine that there are also probably a pretty significant chunk of others who aren't quite as sold.
I mean, it's hard for me to gauge the whole community. I think there's a large section of the community that just doesn't even care about anything about city politics. I don't know. I think it might be at a 7, a 6 or a 7. Mm-hmm. I think people across the political spectrum, different political spectra, have these concerns about city government. I've gotten a lot of feedback from the blog from people of all different political persuasions who they agree on one thing: City Council needs to be more honest with us. They need to be more clear on what they're doing. We need to know what they're doing behind closed doors, and we need to be more involved in what decisions they make.
So there's obviously, throughout this entire process, and I even want to say toward the end of City Manager Horn's tenure, there was a lot of, it seemed, disappointment on the progress in terms of the fight against poverty. Do you think is that atop the list now of items that need to be built upon for that next person who takes on that role?
In my opinion, for me, absolutely. That's I saw the podcast that you and Jackie did. It's great. Anybody who's watching, listening at home, go back and watch that. Especially if you care about Geneva, it really goes into why all that information is important. Because the city of Geneva there's been a crisis going on with poverty. The poverty rate has been going up and up. As at the same time, downtown is getting better. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get better unless we have a city government that's serious about addressing it. Right now, there's a group that's there was Tools for Social Change did a series of community dialogues related to the Economic Opportunity Task Force, which is one of the goals of the comprehensive plan for the next 15 years for the city, to create essentially a new city department that's going to address the barriers to upward mobility for people of low income in the city. And that's the people of the city. When the comprehensive plan was put together, they put that as high enough of a priority that we want it as something that our city government's going to do, and not just the same old, social programs and job postings. There needs to be some real novel, unique ideas and different ways to address poverty and how that affects everyone in Geneva, not just the people who are broke. So this new city manager certainly, absolutely needs to have knowledge of this and needs to have some kind of background and some kind of understanding of why this is so important.
Is there evidence out there to suggest that this group of individuals is active and engaged in this process as it stands so far?
You mean the
search? Just in terms of the search for the next city manager, it seems like if there's one group that has the most to lose or gain, depending on how this process plays out, it seems to be that group. Now, are you seeing or are others seeing a lot of engagement on that side? Are they rallying, or is this something that isn't quite getting the attention it should deserve?
I don't think it's necessarily getting the attention that it deserves, especially within the communities that it affects the most, as far as income. I think a lot of people are, when you're having a tough time making ends meet, and when you're working
basic needs,
you're more concerned about whether you're going to keep your lights on than who the next city manager is. And it's also one of those things that's kind of, people don't know what a city manager is. People know what a mayor is, but a lot of people don't really know what a city manager is. But that's not saying that everyone who cares, or everyone who is of low income doesn't care about the city manager search. A lot of people do. There are a lot of people in our community who are getting more engaged and learning more about it. And Tools for Social Change is meeting with the city tomorrow, some members to present their studies and to move forward with that. So, and that's critical, because if you have a new city manager coming in who doesn't prioritize that, or a new city council coming in who doesn't prioritize that, they're going to fail the people of the city, and they're going to fail everyone who worked on the comprehensive plan.
What do you tell people who are sitting out there or listening, or maybe not even listening to this, but hearing some folks talk about this issue or any number of the issues in Geneva or anywhere? What do you tell them when they ask the question, well, what can I do? What can I do to get involved or to make a difference? Because when we threw out the question earlier, prior to the last time you were going to be on, we had a date set, and then a couple things came up. We threw out the question, what would you ask in this conversation? And it was a lot of, well, what could individuals do? What could we do? I have my own view. It seems as simple as showing up to city council meetings to start. But how do you approach that question? Because it's really delicate, because like you said, people have jobs and they're struggling, and you got all these different factors happening. So how do you approach it?
Well, there's different groups, Geneva Women's Assembly, Tools for Social Change, or there are places, people that are already working on these issues and have already been on the ground doing this for years. Mm-hmm. So seek them out, learn about it. Going to city council meetings that can have a lot of influence, but especially if a lot of people show up. Council doesn't really sway them very much if one or two people get up there and complain about one or two things. But when you see 15, 20 people come in and they're all passionately talking about the same thing, council is pushed to act. And the other thing I would tell people is to vote. I've never been someone who strongly preaches voting in the presidential elections or anything like that. A lot of that, it seems very abstract. It's far away and it doesn't affect your immediate life. But right here in the city council, they have so much influence that people don't even don't even understand. And you get a strong city council in there. If you get 6 or 7 people who their priority is addressing poverty in the city, you're going to see some things change. Your life is going to change. Those would be probably a few of them.
All right, so last question before I get you out of here. Get the crystal ball out, and where do you see this going? I mean, let's fast forward past 2018. Let's look at 2019, 2020. Depending on how this process plays out, it seems like that individual could be put in a really tough situation, even in the best of circumstances. Are they going to be set up for success, and what does Geneva look like over the course of the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, given that this is the way this situation is playing out now?
Well, I think it's going to, in the relatively short term, I think it's going to have a big effect on the next city council election. There's a lot of rumblings. A lot of people who've never been involved in city politics now are talking about running, are talking about how they can get involved, getting people elected. I think there's going to be quite a change on city council between now and next year. The next city manager, I hope that it's someone who really understands and represents and listens to the entire community. That's my hope. I don't know if that's my crystal ball. Maybe it's my hopeful crystal ball. But I also know that new city manager is going to be under a microscope, at least my microscope. It's not about not giving them a chance, but there's a lot of issues in this city that haven't been addressed, that have been glossed over. And I would like to think that with the next city council, the city is going to move more toward inclusion and especially towards more transparency within our city government.
So where can people find you? Where can they get all this great information? Obviously, the blog, genevabeliever.com, but where else are you? I know you have a podcast. You're like 2 or 3 months in on that, right?
Yep, I have a podcast. You can find all the information about that on genevabeliever.com. I haven't done my podcast this month. This is kind of my podcast right now for this month. This month on Facebook, Geneva Believer. That's about all my social media, but genevabeliever.com. Go to the blog. So even a phone number on there. If you want to give me a call, leave some comments, tell me what you're thinking, email me at jim@genevabeliever.com. And I'm out and about in the city too. Ward 6.
It's all about conversation, right?
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming in for this conversation. Obviously, really important stuff, really complicated stuff if you aren't living it every day. You guys are able to focus on these issues and really dig into them, which is invaluable right now in our the state of media right now. So thank you for that service, and also thank you for being here.
And thank you, Josh. I'm a big fan of yours too.
Appreciate that. Well, that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Jim, our listeners, and of course FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. You can catch Inside the FLX on Saturdays during the 10 o'clock hour on WDWN 89.1 FM in Auburn or 97.7 FM in Fulton. The program also airs on Sundays and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, channel 1304, and it's available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Stay informed, Finger Lakes. We'll catch you next time.